My name is Krishna, and I'm director at a company called Lumina Datamatics. Today's topic, which is about digital, right? So digital publishing is no longer digitization, right? Now they're thinking that it is impacting not only digital publishing per se, but also the way you curate your content, the way you produce it, the way you distribute it, promote it, right? And on the other hand, there are business models to be looked at. So from the traditional business model of getting revenues per title, now it's moving to subscription models and ebooks and lending libraries and pay-per-view kind of thing. So these are the kind of challenges which we thought require deliberation. And that's where, as a company, we started this initiative called Futurdialog. Today, we thought that we will put together an eminent panel which comes with a variety of experience and exposure to talk about what lies ahead for so-called digital.
I'm just looking at on the really good Wi-Fi. I'm looking at the questions that were set that presumably you will have read, and this is why you've come to this session. What does digital mean for various segments and sectors of publishing? That's boring, so we're not going to talk about that. What should your winning strategy for the digital future be? I charge a very good rate, daily rate of consultancy to answer that one. What impact will HTML5 have on digital publishers? Ebooks, web, app, what's next in the digital publishing world? What challenges lie ahead in digital publishing? And I'm going to throw this question to Dan first and really ask whether or not as an industry we should be behaving more like startups in terms of iterative development, or whether or not we should continue to embrace every revolution that kind of washes over our industry.
I think, we're at a really interesting moment, I think, because 5 years ago there was a lot of talk about what digital could do to the industry, what impact it would have, be it apocalyptic, be it transformative in a really compelling and positive sense. And I think it really has been transformative. I think the day-to-day jobs that people do in publishers or in the book industry have been really transformed. The terminology we use, the way that we think, I think the focus on audiences and the kind of experiences that we can create for them and the way that we can measure how we reach them, in even what they're doing, this has opened up a new world of possibility. In terms of your question around startup culture, I think what we've seen in the last few years is publishers coming really into contact with startups and the wider, I think, sort of revolutionary forces coming out of Silicon Valley and through Tech City here. And we've been in a dialogue with them, essentially a conversation about how we can work together. And some of those startups come towards the book industry and see something that is ripe for disruption. But at the same time, some have been very successful, some have been less successful, but we've certainly learned a lot from each other. And working in a digital department in a publisher, we can see the really great way that those startups usually behave around being so user-focused. And essentially you could say, every book is a startup. That's true. It's funded by venture capital. There's a lot of risk involved. You want to put it out in the world and for it to succeed. But the actual working processes in our, we work in a very linear way, I think, as an industry, at least in trade publishing. And I think it has been useful, that idea that you put something out there and that it isn't necessarily the final thing, that you can be iterative, you can release new versions. I mean, essentially, things and corrections and amendments have always been made between a hardback and a paperback edition of a book. But the opportunity now is there to do that in a digital way and to explore what that means, and then also what that means for the way that you work internally. I think we've got a long way to go until, and I think actually it's, we need to ask ourselves whether that kind of way of working actually really suits every part of the business, or whether we should be looking to do it in one part of the business. So I certainly think that, the encounter with startup culture and the way that a lot of technological trends are driven at the moment has been really educational for publishing. And I'd like to think that it's also been instructive for those companies too as to how our industry works and what's difficult about working with our industry.
I think that's really interesting. It's really interesting to hear you use the word user rather than reader.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's something, wonder if there's something in that, in the way that we think about not just the way that people consume the content in terms of reading it, but the way they interact with the content in other ways. Lisa, do you have a view on whether or not, as an industry, we're starting to treat our readers differently?
Yeah, I do actually. I think, interestingly, when I worked for Waterstones, it was the days of the microfiche, and I'm sure everyone's far too young in the room to remember, but if I had a penny for every time a customer came to ask me when the next Terry Pratchett was going to be published, I would have been so rich, because nobody knew anything about publishing. Data just wasn't available to anybody. And then, very suddenly, everybody had access to all data all the time. And I think the huge thing that has changed is data and information and access really to readers, consumers, users, but the people who we're targeting. And for us, one of the biggest changes has been getting the data right, so that everything that feeds out, territorial information, titles, subtitle, prices, format, you need to be right early, because customers can see now. So publishing for me is changing very much, and I think we're seeing it with the vloggers at the moment, where you're seeing this whole new world of readers who are young, predominantly young people who are looking for a completely different kind of experience that will go alongside their video blog experience. And for years we wouldn't even know about that world, and we certainly wouldn't know how to go and talk to those people to find out what they want. So I'm seeing consumer insight and data as being absolute keys to unlocking the future of publishing.
That's interesting, because it involves both technology and an understanding of the... Because I think technology is so often presented as a solution in its own right. Here's the technology, this will solve all of your problems. Forgetting, of course, the understanding that needs to go, the heuristic response that has to go with that. With that technology. Because
fundamentally, the readers or the final user will make their decision. So early on with digital publishing, we all thought, let's get in there. We've got to do ebooks with video content. It's really important. And we're in there with Michael Connelly's new novel. We're creating films. We're doing maps of LA. Nobody's interested. Nobody wants our view of Michael Connelly as LA, or our view of Harry Bosch.
I made that enhanced ebook.
Yes, it was very good.
And it was very successful.
So I've been thinking about this question, as you brought up, Dan, about ebook sales going down, but are they going down, or is there a huge market that's taking place that's invisible to us traditional publishers? So there's many different things that come up in this. So I ask my people and myself to have the thought is to act like a grown-up but think like a startup, and to apply that to every aspect of the organisation. We've been doing things with vloggers. We've created a whole new imprint, and during the course of that, and there's 9 people, and the experience of going out in a traditional manner with people who have come to the market in a very untraditional pathway has taught us a tremendous amount. So what we learn from that, then we can apply to the next one, so that each time we can modify our behaviour or provide different... They need a different experience. Their reader needs a different experience. The bloggers need a different experience. And so what we have to do is to modify our behaviour so we can satisfy all those aspects.
That's a very good point. Ralph, what do you think about this? Do you think, tech and... Are we maturing as an industry, that we're not just looking at technology as a solution in its own right?
Listening to the points you made, I'm thinking whether it actually isn't a revolution. You said,
Well, Judith's saying the revolution has happened.
Yeah, well, I think in many ways we're still at the beginning of things. Maturing industry, whatever that is. At least in Germany, and you may be totally wrong what I'm saying in terms of the UK market, but at least working with German publishers, I have the feeling we haven't been very good at looking outside the box too much, and I think competition has changed a lot during the last few years, and we need to look outside the box to look at what consumers, what the options are for the consumers. It's not book competing with book, or book competing with ebooks, or whatever. We're in such a highly competitive marketplace right now, because consumers have so much power in what they choose, having choice, and that's where we need to go in terms of thinking, in terms of organizational skills, organizational setup within publishing houses, I think, And that's in a way revolutionary, because that changes ways we work, or we have worked over the last, I don't know, it's not a matter of HTML5 or format or whatever, you know, it's a matter of consumer behavior in a way, and finding media and having the options and understanding competition, which is not within our industry. It's much broader than that. And that's a technology thing, because people start to consume differently, behave differently, finding content differently, and it's always, you know, fighting for time budget.
So are we talking about we've used the word disruption, which is good, but is the disruption a technological one or a consumer expectation one? Because, you know, technically...
Well, I just want to say Book Marketing Limited did a survey in the UK recently, which was really interesting because it told us that people are reading more. So you think, great, people are reading more, but they're not reading books. They're reading the news on their mobile phone, they're reading blogs, they're reading whatever. They're looking at the weather, they're using their phone as an alarm clock, and they're counting that as reading. So I think that we're competing with all the other types of entertainment much more than we ever have been previously. Which wasn't really what I was supposed to say, but...
No, I think you're right, and I think that's part of the culture disruption that we've seen. We're battling as publishers. We're battling in a different cultural space than we ever have before. But ultimately, the technology around publishing hasn't changed for hundreds of years, other than it's got faster. It's on different kinds of paper. And is HTML? I guess the question is things like EPUB 3 and HTML5 and ebooks just a further disruption of what kind of paper we're printing on, or whether or not we're doing raised lettering on the covers, or whether or not we're changing the way colours work on spines, because we've done research that shows that different colours stand out on shelves. You know, this kind of thing publishing has been doing for a very long time. And so I really want to try and tease out whether or not we're just being bad at responding to the cultural shift, rather than being naive about technology being the solution to our problems.
Oh, I don't think we've been that slow, actually. You know, I think there's been a misconception that publishing generally has been a bit slow about adapting everything. But if you just look at what has happened and how much content had to be reformatted and digitalized just to exist in that form, I think publishers should be very pleased about that. I think a lot of kind of that narrative that goes around about the inefficiency of companies has been started by the people who are the new competition, and that's one of the biggest things I think we're facing, is there's a huge new source of competition coming from every which way, and that's not to be underestimated. And the responsiveness, the way publishers respond to both their author needs and the new access to information, and to be transparent. So there's a new way to think about ourselves, rather than think about in terms of analog versus digital. It's about how do you conduct a business, and how do you do content enhancement, how do you do IP sourcing. All of these things are really where the big questions are, and how do you motivate your readers to be actually interested in what you're doing, and how do you stay abreast of that and have a viable business?
I just wanted to pick, I mean, it's quite interesting, the diversity of views about, this thing comes up again and again about cultural competition, and I don't have a solid answer for this, because I'm not sure, but there's people in our business who have very different views of this. Some people say, books versus Angry Birds, there is no competition, don't worry about it. What Lisa was saying earlier around what we've done very successfully is basically create perfectly in parallel to our print, what we're doing in print, this digital version of it, which sells and is consumed and looks very much the same. So the kind of interesting questions for me are we have we done a really good job of consolidating the audience we already have and keeping them there, and in the way that Waterstones has done a very good job recently of consolidating its business.
But I do have an opinion about Candy Crunch.
You surprised me.
Oh yeah, well, the thing about Candy Crunch, we can learn a ton of things from that. It's all about scarcity of time, okay? So you've got to unlock that wretched thing because you can't wait till it recharges for free. You're willing to pay for it. All of a sudden, any kind of idea you had at the beginning of your session that you weren't ever going to buy another, stupid time extension, you do. So scarcity and time and urgency are the two key motivating factors. So what can we learn for that we can put into our ebooks? And is there a way of actually merging some of these things together rather than seeing them as competition, seeing them as something that can help us develop a new way of presenting our content that taps into some of those elements?
They may well be brought back, but I think they are dead at the moment, because I think what is being demonstrated at the moment is that people do want to consume books in the way that they consume books, and actually a distraction from that is not good, and that's just being played out in sales. That's exactly what we're seeing. Now, I don't disagree that there should be a feedback loop, but whether or not you want to stop reading the Connolly book to see a what was it? It was a news report, wasn't it? It was. As you were reading, there was a really very well shot news report of the action that was taking place in the book, and it breaks the narrative. And I think that goes back to your point about a good novel keeps you hooked. And the problem is, enhanced ebooks, as we've done them so far, break that. We're using technology for technology's sake.
Exactly. But now that we have the technology, we can develop a way of making them integral to the narrative rather than supplementary to the narrative. So now that the technology existed, all you need is the intellectual kind of property that you feed into that format.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Where the content has been crafted into the book, and it's been very beautifully crafted into the book. But what we have seen is that people don't want to break that connection with the narrative in order to break away and consume something a little bit differently. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting, actually. Have we been concentrating on the technology so much that we're doing all of our innovation in the digital product rather than in the print product? Ralph, have you got
I think at the end of the day, it's a question about marketing. It's not a question about technology, right? Marketing in its core sense, not as selling, but understanding the market need and the consumer's need. You know, it's a perfect example. That's where QR codes make sense. That's where enhancements make sense. It probably doesn't make sense if I kill people's imagination of a content because I tell them what it should look like. You know, that's probably not what we want to do. And I think that's, for me, that's something we need to look at. Concentrate on marketing as it should be, to understand where the users are and get our head around this growing complexity, because it's not going to be a book as a hardcover, as a paperback. There's going to be so much variety because there's so many different needs in what consumers want and see and experience.
Can we take a generalized view across publishing about how we interact with this stuff, or do we actually have to concentrate on very specific areas and do very, very specific consumer insight work and have a much more mature understanding of technology in order to drive success? And in which case, does that not just become completely unachievable? Does that just suddenly not become far too much work?
No, I mean, that's the whole thing. You've got this opportunity to have a feedback loop. There's a lot of data mining that needs to happen, a lot of insights, and then there's the interpretation of those insights, and then there's the kind of enactment. Publishers are always, and I'm guilty of this, say, but there's no two books alike, which is sort of true, but there are many readers who are similar. So what we need to know is, what are the reading habits? How many people are reading? What kind of book is best read on the phone? What kind of book is best read on a isolated reading device? What other mechanism is it? Where does pricing move levers? What happens and what's duplicable and what was very specific to Girl on the Train?
But we don't know that by now.
Oh, we don't know that by now. No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, because it changes all the time. So there's a lot of statistical information, a lot of data out there that you can get hold of once we know how to gather it together and how to interpret it. But publishers have been very instinctual, which has been great, or like Lot's Wife, have always looked behind them to see where the future is, because we always have to look how many did they sell last time, and that's going to give us an indication of what's going to happen next. But look what happened to her. So that's an area where publishers have to be more sophisticated, or find companies who can outsource to.
Or just simply find great books, because it's very, very simply, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, whatever it is, our job as publishers are to connect great authors whatever that work is, with the readers. So it comes back to Ralph's points about marketing. If we can entrust our publishers to find the best books, then it's up to the publishing company to take those to market in whatever way that can be. And that might mean revisiting in a segmented way in the future. It might mean serialization. It could mean anything. But you've got to start, as a publisher, you have to start with great content. And I think that is what Judith is saying. We don't know, because we're always looking for that next best.
So actually, technology just becomes one of the tools that comes out of the box.
But I'd like
when you have great content.
I'd like to suggest that instead of it being accidental success, perhaps there's some way of being able to be a bit more predictive about what will work and what won't. I visited Indigo in Canada once, and they were saying that all the people who are reading their books on the Kobo are storing them in the cloud, so they know that no one goes past chapter 6 on a particular book, for example. So what does that tell you? Can you use that information to go back to that author to say, I think you have a real problem with chapter 6 here? Or is there something that can help us be more predictive about what will work and what won't work? And there are many different elements of publishing there. We work from a very commercial end to a very sophisticated literary, and there's many markets in between, and much information is in book form, but it's not really a reading experience.
Publishers are going to find their feet again this year. I think publishers have, on the whole, been more rocked than they would necessarily admit by the changes that have washed over them in the last kind of 5 to 10 years, but are now starting to feel confident again that they can make decisions based on data that they have. And I think publishers are getting much more savvy about using data than ever before. And they are going to be more willing to go out on a limb and say, this is the right thing to do, this content is amazing, and we're going to take a risk on it, or we are going to publish it because it is the right thing to do. I think that's what we're going to see in the next 12 months, is publishers finding their feet again. I really, really hope that publishers' marketing teams start to catch up with the technology in the way that their production teams have. Because I think publishers' production teams were the first to embrace technology as a tool to enhance and help their production flows and make the book, whether or not that is print or digital. I think the consumer insight teams were probably the second. I think the authors were very, very quickly behind with the technology as well. But I think the marketing teams are still just starting to understand how powerful marketing and using the tools as digital tools, not as a solution in and of themselves, are going to be. That's probably a hope rather than a prediction, but I really do think that's a shift that we're going to see, and I really, really hope that in the next 12 months we're going to see some really inventive marketing for titles that publishers are going to take more of a risk of, because they're feeling a bit more confident, because they're feeling their feet again. That is it. It is 1 o'clock. We have finished on time. That was my one goal. So we have 15 minutes Q&A now. We are here to answer your questions.
What are some of the most important ways for you to actually nevertheless get hold of good customer data?
Lisa?
Well, it's interesting. I think you're right. We don't get access to a lot of data, and it is a problem, and it's a challenge. But I hope that in the UK we will get to a point where we can at least show combined sales of physical and digital books very soon. Because at the moment the book charts, which are amazing data showing us what's happened, are actually, they're not giving us the full picture, they're only giving us a partial picture. And the bookseller now, for the UK sales, do a monthly top 50 of ebook sales and print and ebook, so you can see that. But for me, the data that's crucial is the data much earlier in the process. So as a publisher, of course we want books to sell, and that's the lifeblood of the industry. But the data that I think we need to look at is, as Judy said, looking back what's happened. We do have to look at the market and understand. So for example, in the UK market at Christmas, usually only half a dozen books will sell more than 100,000 copies. So if you think you're going to publish 3 books that are going to sell 100,000 copies or not, you're probably being foolish. So you have to use that kind of market data to understand where the opportunity is and the size of the opportunity, so you don't simply throw away huge advances that are never going to actually deliver the sales.
Sorry, I just wanted to see if you thought there were any kind of future in things like Scribbled or Kindle Unlimited subscription services?
Did you say the beginning again, sorry?
I wanted to see if you thought there was a future in monthly subscription services.
I don't work for a Shatner, so I can say yes. Absolutely. I don't know when, but absolutely.
Well, it depends whose future is in the subscription service. Whether it's the individual authors, whether it's the subscription service themselves, whether it's the publisher, who's going to be the one who actually profits from the subscription service? That's really the big question in my mind.
Thank you all very much. And can you please give a round of applause for our panel here?
Thank you. Is this ours?
Yeah, just a quick note to say thank you to everybody for sparing their time, and I hope that you all found it useful and insightful as well. And a big thank you for all the panelists for sharing their experiences and their time as well. Thank you so much.